put on my video and get my slides up. Okay. Share screen, PowerPoint. That's not my PowerPoint. Are people seeing my slides? Okay. Play from start. Okay, so my name is Andrea Welsh. Pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm currently at Georgia Institute of Technology as a biophysics researcher, but I'm going to talk about some mental health challenges for early career physicists, as it's a topic that's very important to myself, and I guess many others, because there's interest in this. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about terminology, so we're all on the same page about what I mean when I say mental health, and some of the other terms I'm going to use. Then I'm going to talk about some of the results from research that's been conducted on, there's been a few studies on specifically graduate student mental health recently. Topics that often link poor mental health during graduate school. I'm going to focus a little bit on that. How personal identities can come into play when we're discussing mental health as well. And then ways for improvement in the community and best practices for you yourself if you are dealing with some poor mental health, which I think we all do at different times. There is some discussion about suicide on some of the slides, so I just wanted to give a heads up that if you are not comfortable hearing this, it might be better to just look at the slides when they get posted later. It's not for the whole talk, but I just wanted to give a warning. So what are we talking about when we say mental health? So the sorts of things that we mean are the emotional, psychological, and social well-being of a person, how they cope with stress, the ability to be productive in, it could be work or even at home, whatever you consider productivity, ability to make a meaningful contribution to one's community in different ways, and to meet one's potential, which that could mean any different ways that you might meet your potential. Typically, a lot of times when we talk about if someone's having poor mental health, we want to look at these things over a range of time, typically a few weeks of, how are you doing about these things? And if you're not doing well, you might be experiencing some poor mental health. Of course, I think all of these things, we can be better or worse at different times, but it's how it all fits together. So what does it look like for a person? It could be, people will experience poor mental health in a variety of different ways. It could be eating or sleeping too much or too little, pulling away from people and usual activities you might be participating in, having low or no energy, which, some things that you might have been able to do before pretty easily, maybe now you really have to get yourself, worked up to go do it, feeling numb or like nothing matters anymore. There's also physical aspects of poor mental health, such as unexplained aches and pains. A lot of times this could be even things like headaches, feeling helpless or hopeless, experiencing severe mood swings that cause problems in relationships, thinking of harming yourself or others, and the inability to perform daily tasks. So there's a lot of words that come up when we think about mental health. Of course, I think one of the main ones are things like depression or anxiety, but this is just even like a sampling of what I'm talking about when somebody might have a mental illness or be dealing with different mental health issues. But the important thing that I want to bring up here is that you don't need to be officially or even unofficially diagnosed with an illness to have poor mental health or to take an active role to improve whatever mental health that you have. So there are points where you could not be dealing with anything like depression, but still be doing something because you're having a bad week or two and need to improve your own mental health. So I'm going to mention some national statistics here. This is from the National Alliance of Mental Illness. So about 20% of U.S. adults experience mental illness. So this is from 2018. So that's a decent chunk of the population in the U.S. 4.6 of U.S. adults experience serious mental illness. So there's different levels that a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a counselor might determine if you are dealing with a mental illness, and it depends on, how many of certain qualities you're experiencing and for how long you have experienced them. So this is in particular a serious mental illness. 16.5% of U.S. youth aged 6 to 17 experience a mental health disorder, and this was for 2016. And if we look at broken down in different demographic groups, there are some variance depending on who we're talking about. So for non-Hispanic Asian, we have 14.7, non-Hispanic white, 20.4, non-Hispanic Black or African, 16.2, non-Hispanic mixed or multiracial, it's a bit higher, 26.8, Hispanic or Latino, 16.9, or if you're lesbian, gay, or bisexual, it's now much higher, 37.4. But one thing I want to point out about these numbers is I think this is also reliant on how open different communities are about talking about their mental health or seeking help for themselves. So these numbers might not be the best representative saying, this group necessarily experiences mental illness more or less, but maybe they're not reporting it because they're not treating it as the problem that it is. So now specifically about suicide, it's the second leading cause of death among people aged 10 to 34. So we're definitely talking about the school-aged people here now. And it's the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S. Since 2001, the overall suicide rate in the U.S. has increased by 31%. So I'm not sure exactly what has led to that increase, but it is pretty shocking about how high it's been increasing. 46% of people who die by suicide had a diagnosed mental health condition. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than straight youth. 75% of people who die by suicide are male. Transgender adults are nearly 12% more likely to attempt suicide than the general population, and that is a huge number that I just want to sit on for a moment. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to figure out how to best support transgender people. And the annual prevalence of serious thoughts of suicide by U.S. demographic groups, so 4.3% of all adults. For school-aged people, it's a bit higher. High school in particular, it's 17.2. But then adding on this identity of lesbian, gay, or bisexual high school students, we now have almost 50%. So this is again by the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and they have a few other more statistics. So if this is something you're interested in reading about further, I recommend looking there. So how can it affect your life as an academic? So this is coming from partially personal experience and also talking with a lot of other people who I know that are undergoing mental health issues, but such things are not being able to concentrate while working, social anxiety causing difficulties networking at conferences, or even working in your research group, no matter how small or big it could be. missing classes for large periods of time due to mental illness, and some of these classes might not have a flexibility in mind for students who are experiencing such a mental illness. Missing opportunities because you feel you aren't worth it or good enough, or you are too exhausted to, like this is a specific one, finish applications in time or attend events. Not being able to connect with others because of the stigma talking about your situation. I think there's still stigma there, but I do see that the conversation has been increasing. I don't know of any way of quantifying that at the moment, but I do think that it's great that there's a lot of discussion and like a talk like this that's at a major conference, where there was also supposed to be a mental health meetup that was organized by the conference. Also, not having a professor or research advisor who understands what you might need to care for yourself while being productive. And I think the flip side of this is, as somebody who might have a mental illness or be suffering from mental health themselves, not knowing what to ask for to be productive. So if you don't really understand what's going on and you're in a bad mental space, you might not be able to say, hey, I really need this like very basic thing. And trying to figure that out might take a lot of time and a lot of trial and error. So I'm going to focus on first some results from a paper that was published by Levick et al. In 2017. This was specifically about PhD students surveyed in Belgium. So for each of these symptoms, people decided if they agreed with it or not. So 41% felt under constant strain, 30% were unhappy and depressed, 28% lost sleep over worry about their academics, 24% lost confidence in self, 16% felt worthless, and 15% felt like they couldn't make any decisions. And as I was saying before, there's different layers of mental health and mental illness, and so it's important to note how many of these they agreed with. So 51% reported at least 2 of these symptoms, and about a third reported at least 4 of those symptoms. So now they're in the category of having a severe mental illness. So of those who sought assistance, only 35% that they found helpful resources at their own institution. So that's another concern that is coming up of, are these resources helpful? And also, are these resources, even if they are helpful, they could be overburdened so that there are many people trying to use these resources and not able to use them at a given time. Nearly 20% said that they tried to find help at their home institution but didn't feel supported. And there's someone is quoted as, there's so many cultural and financial barriers to seeking help. So some home institutions might not have free services, or they might be free but only for a limited time. So there's a lot of issues with services that could be coming up, and part of this survey showed that we really need to have more support for people with poor mental health. And there was also a comparison with what was considered highly educated people in the general population to see how normal these numbers were. And these numbers were 2.5 times more likely. So it is a significant difference than people in the general population and how they have mental health or poor mental health or poor mental illness. A second survey that came around about the same time surveyed 2,279 graduate students. This is from multiple countries and a bunch of institutions. However, their findings were pretty similar in terms of 41% of grad students scored as having moderate to severe anxiety compared to 6% of the general population. 39% of graduate students scored as having moderate to severe depression as compared to 6% of the general population. And this was broken up also by gender. As mentioned before, transgender people experience some of these issues more, so that's closer to the 55-57%, and women were slightly experiencing depression and anxiety slightly more than their male counterparts. So this survey in particular also focused on relationship with an advisor, which is why I was wondering a little bit more about how that was presented in the previous talk. So of those who had anxiety or depression, more often than not, people seem to feel like their academic mentor or their advisor was not as supportive, was not helping their career, they weren't feeling valued by them, and this was about half the people on average that experienced anxiety or depression were feeling this way, particularly with their advisors. Back to the Levick survey, they also looked at relationship with advisor. In particular, they talked about leadership style of advisor, and they categorized it into 3 different types of leadership. They weren't exactly clear with what was different about these styles, but they said there is inspirational leadership style, autocratic leadership style, and laissez-faire leadership style. And they correlated how students reported their advisor's leadership style with how they were reporting their mental health, and found that there was some sort of correlation where inspirational leadership style tended to correlate more with students having better mental health. Laissez-faire leadership style correlated more with students that were experiencing some sort of psychological distress. So these are some comments that were pulled out about advisors from the Graduate Student Happiness and Well-Being Report, which was done in 2014. I'm not going to read all of them, but I'll just pick off a few here. So my advisor is not useful as a mentor and doesn't really help much with my project, but that is typical for advisors, and if you expect otherwise, you didn't have realistic expectation for grad school. I guess this one is of interest to me because this person's kind of saying, well, it's a problem, but doesn't seem to be hopeful, at least that they feel like it has to be this way instead of that we could be making some sort of change about it. Let's see, another one that says, I feel that professors should be required to take courses on mentorship and management. Also, advisors need training in how to be better mentors. So I think talking about mentorship earlier, is very, very important, since it seems like there is some issue where students are not feeling like their advisors are good at mentoring them as being scientists, as being researchers, and kind of helping them get to their next point in their career. So some other concerns that have been cited in these studies, poor work-life balance, long work hours, with usually funding that doesn't support those sort of work hours, little time for social activities. While family can be supportive, there's also the two-body problem of, are we even going to be in the same sort of place? There's also issues of, for grad students in particular, when they're considered a student and when they're considered an employee. If classes are canceled, are they still expected to work? They're they're a student and they have certain research credits. Typically, I see students working every day of the week, all hours of the day. So there's some issues there. What sort of services they can access, I think, also goes into that if they're a student or employee. Lack of community. There is related to funding, this sort of publish or perish mentality. A lot of scientists will find that they might be doing a lot more writing grants and less of the science that they want to. So maybe the understanding of what grad school or doing a postdoc is not advertised well enough to them, and they're not doing what they expected to be doing. The number of people as grad students and researchers are increasing, but the sort of funding and awards that are available have remained relatively constant. Again, this sort of principal investigator student relationship, this idea that I want to focus on for a moment of like what is actual success in research. We're kind of working all the time and we're not going to get results right away. So how do you feel accomplished if your problem is taking a very long time to succeed at, and if you were going in the wrong direction, how do you deal with that sort of feeling? So there's also lack of career development, the how to get jobs outside of academia. Can your mentor help you even find jobs outside of academia and advise you in such a way? How to market the skills that you get during a PhD, or network for getting these sort of careers. And also things just like how do you get skills for your interview or managing a lab. So I want to also focus on two quotes that have to do with my last slide. And this, I think, is a very extreme case, but it's not an isolated case. I've heard many similar issues like this from other graduate students. So this student had said that they could not, I think, maybe be in the office at a certain time because they were doing counseling, and the advisor wrote back, "I need to keep track of your progress. You are to be in your office from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. unless you have lectures or teaching. Irrespective of your health, mood, or state, your past does not concern our work. I would like you to discontinue the therapy/psychiatry treatment you are undergoing. You must condition yourself to believe that work is the best therapy." So again, I think this is an extreme case, but I've heard similar things from other students. This is from a blog post from 2012, where students were asking how many hours are we expected to work, and it says, "We have received some questions about how many hours a student is expected to work. There's no easy answer, as what matters is your productivity, particularly in the form of good scientific papers. However, if you informally canvass the faculty, those people for whose jobs you came here to train, most will tell you that they worked 80 to 100 hours a week in graduate school. No one told us to work those hours, but we enjoyed what we were doing enough to want to do so. We were almost always in the office, including at night and weekends." And I think even though this faculty is not saying outright, "We want you to work these hours," this sort of statement can lead to feeling like, oh, maybe I'm not as passionate enough about my work as some of these other professors are. Maybe there's something wrong with me that I can't do these hours. There's ways of internalizing this and feeling like, I guess I should be doing these hours, even though they don't give an explicit recommendation of how many hours they're expected to work. So before I mentioned the kind of the number of PhD students increasing, but the academic jobs staying relatively the same. So this is from a Nature paper in 2016, where it shows that the proportion of people that completed a PhD doubled, but the number of academic jobs stayed relatively the same. So that's a big discrepancy in numbers there. But also this idea of my advisor looks down on non-academic jobs and thinks that they're only suitable for people who aren't very motivated. And I think this also can come up with advising where if you are, after defending your thesis, if you're saying I'm applying to this sort of job, could still even be an academic job, but perhaps it's something like visiting faculty or teaching at, a liberal arts college, the advisor might, still push for more of the postdoc route, the researcher route, and kind of make you think this is what is expected of me, even though this might not be what the person actually wants. And around 30% disagreed or strongly disagreed with the statement that their supervisor has useful advice for non-academic careers. So talking a little bit more about demographics and mental health. So these results here are from the Graduate Student Happiness and Wellbeing report that I mentioned before. So on average, students of, quote, a other race or an ethnicity than white reported lower well-being, and specifically African American and Native American or Alaska Native students felt that they are less likely to feel valued and included in their groups and their research departments, and they're less likely to feel that their cultures are valued and respected. And you see similar results for the lesbian, gay, and bisexual grad students in this report. They didn't have numbers. It's something that I might want to contact them about for the future, but there does seem to be some sort of difference that they noticed in their survey. Other groups that felt like this were older students who also reported lower well-being, so older than, I guess, the typical or average age of what a graduate student is. I think, yeah, so then, but there was no big gap for gender or citizenship. So another thing I wanted to bring up quickly is some results from the LGBT Climate and Physics survey that was mentioned before. So there's, since we are seeing that there seems to be more mental health concerns about by LGBT graduate students, but also in particular in the physics community, just to point out some of the results of this survey, such as the observation of exclusionary behavior, so how people saw being excluded to someone else in the LGBT community, and how for men and women, this is a bit lower than for gender nonconforming people. And in particular, if we compare transgender people are people who align differently than the gender they were assigned at birth, versus cis people who identify as the gender they were assigned at birth. So there is this discrepancy there between transgender and cisgender, and also in particular about experiencing that exclusionary behavior themselves. Then there's some issues about, the sort of climate they have in terms of how their coworkers make comments, how they're expected to act, if they must be secretive or not, how mentoring works out. I'm not going to go through all the details, but I highly recommend looking at the climate survey. I also did want to point out this image that was going around from 2015, which was a poster advertising LGBT events at CERN from their LGBT group there, which they were finding ripped down after being put up repeatedly. So they are experiencing this sort of isolation in the community, and that's also feeding into some of the poor mental health that they might be experiencing. So I mentioned these things before, and now I want to talk a little bit, well, here's a reminder, but also talk a little bit about some sort of recommendations. So an individual development program and mutual expectations documents, these were mentioned in earlier talks. I wanted to point them out a little bit more in depth. So basically, the IDP is a structured planning tool which helps students and postdocs identify long-term career goals, make a plan for improving your skills, set goals for coming years to improve efficiency and productivity, structure productive conversations with your mentors about career planning and developments. So these are sort of the things that we expect to happen between a researcher and their advisor, but might not be happening specifically or as well organized, or be happening at all, depending on the effort that both the student and the advisor are putting into it. So, working with, I think I'm like running out of time here, but having this as a tool to encourage advisors to go through with their students and identify what is expected and how to assess things like improvement can definitely help students with their career goals, feel like they're making progress, and improve their mental health. Similarly, there's the mutual expectation documents. I have a link to one that Georgia Tech has on their website, and this is also another two-way document of going through what students and researchers expect from their advisor, but also what advisors expect from their students. And this is something you would come up with at the beginning and then modify and add to as you see fit. There's examples on the link here. So I'm going to skip that and go straight to the takeaways. So I think one of the important things is to have some sort of schedule, but be flexible about it. So have semi-regular check-ins and meetings and assessments. And I think if you don't make sure that they are happening, then it's really easy for a whole semester or more to go by without some sort of check-in with your students. Make sure the goals are reasonable and clear. But also, and this goes along with the flexibility, reassess what those goals are. Schedules change all the time. Progress changes all the time. So you might not meet the deadlines. So it's important to keep reassessing that. It seems like another issue is the career development. So it's important for advisors to find the sort of resources they can give to their researchers. Encourage non-research activities to help these other skills that might be for jobs that are outside of academia. So having some sort of leadership position and organization skills, while it's taking away from research time, not everyone is going to be a researcher afterwards. So it's important to incorporate this. Make sure there are scheduled breaks for students and postdocs, such as, no working on weekends, or I don't check my email after a certain time. And I think a big thing is also to destigmatize failure and celebrate success. So we take a lot of our successes for granted. We say, well, we were supposed to do that, so it's not a big deal. But just take a moment to celebrate those successes. And we are going to be failing all the time as researchers, and it's important to remind our students that we are all doing that. Takeaway for admins and departments. So I think department hiring should include plans for mentoring and advising students and postdocs. There's already typically a teaching statement that needs to be done. Some schools are including a diversity statement requirement, but perhaps a more in-depth plan for how you are running your lab and how are you mentoring your students. Have these sort of social events for students and postdocs. And I think with this, you have to also encourage advisors to allow their students to attend. I think I do know students where they feel like they cannot attend some of the meetings going on in the department, even though they want to, because they think their advisor will look down on them. So this is something where you will have to encourage professors to do this. And there might be some modifying structure for the PhD programs, such as how students are being evaluated. Make sure there's a system of checks in place. So if there is a toxic advisor, if the advisor is not helping the student, there's a way to assess that. I think a lot of this is kind of repeating what has been said already. So I'm going to skip ahead. Then for students and young researchers, seek professional help when needed, not only with a therapist or a counselor, but also with, the grad advisor or ombudsperson or the chair of the department or HR or Title IX or whatever the case may be. Find a support community. Some of these have been said. I think a big thing is also knowing what your limits are and creating those boundaries. It might be hard for other people to respect those boundaries, but trying to figure out what those boundaries are is one of the big deals. Making sure you have time for fun and asking for help. I am not going to go through the sort of resources that are available for that if you are having a mental health concern, but it'll be in my slides when I post them. I want to quickly advertise this Google group and Slack channel that has others from, I guess now not just the physics community, but from STEM communities in general. It has about 90 members in each one of them, from a range of from undergrad all the way up to faculty and non-academics. It's for asking for advice and sharing articles and having meetups. If you are interested in that, please email me. Also, remember that working hard is important, but feeling good is important too. And I'll take questions. I have a bunch of resources that you're not going to be able to read all of them, but if anybody wants the slides directly, please ask me afterwards. So. Stop sharing. So let me check. Oh, there's a lot of things in the chats happening. Yes, the incredible letter from the unsupportive advisor. I don't know what Ree was talking about, a flat lie. I think that might have also been the time. Monica says, APS has a career mentoring program, Impact, for matching graduate students and postdocs with physicists in industry. It's free to participate at impact.aps.org. Thank you so much. That's very important. I think a lot of people don't realize that that is a resource they can use. Okay, so are there no questions? Thanks, Daria. Thanks, Eric.
Hey, Andrea, did you see the comment about what the flat lie was about?
Yes, I did see that.
Okay, good. I didn't want you to...
Yes, that is the 80. Yeah, I figured it was the 80 to 100 hours of work. Yeah, I think that's a lie. So, no, it's okay. It's all good. Thank you. Well, I'm going to just quickly pull up, let's see, I'm going to put a link in the chat for the LGBT climate survey so that people can know where to look at it. Unfortunately, as mentioned before, that Savannah wasn't able to give the talk. She has some slides, but I don't know if I feel very comfortable sharing them. So here's the link. We will be posting all of these on the March meeting virtual website in the next week or so. And I think Savannah's also going to be posting a talk as well. If not, people can contact me for reaching out to her. So if there's no questions, I guess I will end the session. Let's thank all of our speakers one more time. I think it was a very great session, and I'm glad we were able to do it. Thank you, everyone, for calling in. And if there's any follow-up questions anyone has with a particular speaker, feel free to, we have the schedule posted online, so you can contact individual speakers directly, or if you can't find their contact, let me know and I can put you in contact with them. So. Thanks all.